What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro 5G. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and in case you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now before we look at the actual phone itself, let's take a quick look at what comes in the box. So there's not really a whole lot in here. At the very bottom, we got a SIM card removal tool. Then in here, we got a quick start guide and a USB-C cable. So as you can see there is no wall adapter included in the box, so in case you were expecting one, definitely keep that in mind. Now getting into the actual phone itself, with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro, we're getting a 6.82-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 263, and an aspect ratio of 20.5:9. So in general, while not really being the most impressive display out there, for a phone that's really barely over $200, I would say it's at least okay. At 6.82 inches, it is definitely a really large display, so if you're going to be on your phone a lot, this is definitely a good thing, and with the 20.5:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a pretty tall and narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like browsing the web, reading, using social media, stuff like that, with a form factor like this, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So I am definitely happy with the size and dimensions here. If you're going to be on your phone a lot, consuming a lot of content, it's pretty much the best you can get. Now, on the other hand though, for the actual image quality, it's a little bit less impressive. With the 720p resolution, sure, it doesn't really look that bad, but compared to a good handful of other phones in this price range that have 1080p resolutions instead, you are definitely going to notice the difference. In addition to this, while the colors do look decent and the display isn't really dim or anything, I feel like in general, if the image quality is really a main priority for you, there are definitely some better options out there. But again, the size and dimensions are really good. So the bottom line here is it the best display you can get? Definitely not, but I do think for what it is, as long as you're not expecting amazing image quality, it will at least get the job done. Now for storage, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro is getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So for this price range, the storage here is actually pretty impressive. At full price, this phone is going for around $220-ish, and honestly most people who get it probably aren't even going to be paying full price, and considering that, the average phone in this price range is usually going to have around 64. So if you are looking for a more entry-level 5G phone, but you do want to have a lot of storage for stuff like apps and games, for example, then this phone will be a pretty good choice. Now for security features, this phone does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, which as you can see does have the T-Mobile color. Definitely a pretty cool design here. So in general, maybe a year or two ago, it was a little bit less common for the more entry-level phones like this to have both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock. But honestly, at this point at the end of 2022, pretty much every phone over $100 or so is going to have both, so it's not really too surprising there. But all the same, if having both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock is important to you, then you'll be happy to know that like most phones, this phone does in fact have both options. But with that being said, let's go ahead and give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. Now for the camera setup, we actually do have a pretty impressive camera here. We got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as features go, this phone has pretty much everything, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So if you're taking a lot of pictures and you want a wider variety of features, then this phone will definitely get the job done. Now as far as quality goes, being that this is my first impressions video, I haven't actually used the camera yet, but I would imagine, based on what I know about previous T-Mobile Revvl phones and the average entry-level 5G phone in general, I am expecting the photo quality we get here to be at least good enough for the average user, especially considering, again, we are getting a 50 megapixel camera here, which for a more entry-level phone like this is definitely impressive. Now as far as the RAM and processor go, this phone is getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. Now this processor has been around for quite a while, and I have actually seen a lot of phones with this same processor, but that being said, this is definitely not a bad thing, because I do think the MediaTek Dimensity 700 is a pretty good processor. For an entry-level phone, the performance we're getting here is actually pretty good, so if you're doing more basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe some light mobile gaming, as long as you're not going to be on your phone all the time, you are going to get a pretty good experience here. But that being said, like with any phone in this price range, if you're really a heavy user, if you're going to be on your phone all day and maybe doing more intense activities like high performance mobile gaming and stuff like that, then although again, the performance with this phone is definitely not bad for what it is, for more of a power user, you are probably going to want to spend a bit more money and get a slightly higher end device with a faster processor. Now I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and here are the scores I got. Now what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone's going to be an upgrade for you. In general though, it's really going to depend on what you're coming from, because on one hand, if you're coming from more of an entry-level phone, then chances are this phone might actually be a solid upgrade, but if you're coming from maybe an older flagship phone, then it's definitely going to be a different story. But again, in general, while this is definitely not the fastest phone I've seen, for the average user, for more basic activities and more moderate use, I do think it will get the job done. Now with the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. At 5000 mAh in the US, that's pretty much the largest battery you can get in a smartphone. So if you're looking for a phone that has really good battery life, this definitely will be a good choice. And with 15 watt fast charging, while definitely not being the best fast charging out there, in my experience, the charging speed with this phone is pretty good. For the software, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro does have Android 12, so definitely not bad. At this point in 2022, although a lot of phones are starting to get Android 13, there's still plenty of phones that have Android 12, so it's definitely nothing out of the ordinary. Now with this phone, I'm not really sure if it's going to get any major updates. For these carrier branded devices, I usually don't count on it, but compared to like maybe a really cheap Cricket phone for example, the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro is definitely at a slightly higher level, so I wouldn't rule it out either. As a general rule of thumb, I would say if you're really concerned about having the latest version of Android and the best software support, this is probably not going to be the phone for you. But in general, for the average user, if you want something that runs really well and is at least decently newer, then you will be completely fine here. And again, in my opinion, Android 12 is definitely not bad at all. As far as other features go, one thing I completely forgot to mention when I was going over the battery is that the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro does actually have wireless charging. That's definitely not a feature you see every day on a phone like this, so if that is something you want, then definitely keep this in mind. In addition to this phone also does have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using tap and pay, then you'll be happy to know you can do that with this phone. Taking a look at the overall design here, on the left side we got the slot for the SIM card and the micro SD card. On the bottom, we got a 3.5mm headphone jack, the microphone, USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right side, we got the power key, which again is also the fingerprint scanner, volume down, volume up. On the top, we got the noise cancelling microphone. And on the back, we got the camera module, flash, and T-Mobile branding right here. The back has kind of a frosted material. Fingerprints do show up a little bit, but definitely not too bad. In general, despite definitely being a larger phone, it doesn't really feel bulky or anything, and I feel like even if you put a case on it, it's still going to be decently comfortable for most people. That being said though, the design is really not new at all. In fact, the last T-Mobile phone I covered on this channel, I think it was the Revvl V Plus, looked pretty much exactly like this. So as far as that goes, if you're looking for a phone with more of an exciting design, this is definitely not going to be it. But I feel like most people, especially in this price range, are looking for something a little bit more practical, so it's probably not going to be an issue either way. But that being said, despite the design and materials in general not really being premium or interesting per se, the phone does have a decent amount of weight to it, and the build quality is definitely at least good. So while again, looks wise, this phone is really nothing new, it's definitely still not half bad. But in conclusion, my general first impressions of the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro. Overall, is it going to be the best option in this price range? I feel like that's kind of debatable, because you also got phones like the TCL Stylus 5G for example, that has really similar specs and actually the same processor for that matter. But that phone, as you're going to see in my separate comparison between the two, does have a much better display and a few nicer features. And there are other phones like the Nokia G400 5G, Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G, and a lot of different Samsungs. So the point here is, while on one hand, I definitely do think this is a really good phone by itself, when it comes to others in the same price range, especially considering the deals Metro and T-Mobile are offering, there are really a lot of options out there. But honestly, if you're looking for an entry-level 5G phone that has a really large display, plenty of storage, a really nice camera setup, decent performance, and a really large battery, then in general, I do think the T-Mobile Revvl 6 Pro is definitely worth considering. And if you are looking for a device like this, whether or not it ends up being the absolute best choice, I do think most people will at least be happy with it. Now, once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description as I make them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.